Folks, welcome to another episode of Better You. Today I have an amazing guest. Her name is Noelle. I know Noelle through a personal connection, and I am actually witnessing her growth in the AI data science space for last several years. She's one of the AI leaders, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give stage to Noelle very soon to introduce herself. But for to set the context, what we are going to discuss Noelle's journey into data AI space, and then how she went from being an individual contributor to leadership roles and what are the different companies she worked for. And also, she's playing a key role when it comes to ethics and AI. Noelle, I'm going to actually ask Noelle to talk about ethics when it comes to AI. And then any advice that Noelle can share with the audience, any aspiring leaders who wants to get into AI space, what they should be looking out for, or how they should be starting if they are early in their career, and also when they're setting up AI strategies, how they should be looking at AI from the ethics point of view. So Noel, it's great to have you here. Let's start with your introduction.
Hi, it's great to be talking with you as always. To get started, I currently joined, or more recently joined, a clinical research organization as the head of research analytics, which has been a really interesting experience so far to be helping people. You talked about ethics and being part of what clinical research will be doing for the future and disrupting the innovation there. But I got my start. I've always been a math nerd, grew up as a math nerd, and honestly, I feel like I entered the industry of AI, ML, data science at just the right time. I had an internship in 2007, and I was actually a QA engineering intern while I was in grad school. And I was casually introduced at the time to the director of analytics, and that meeting changed the trajectory of my life and my career. And so my first real job back in 2008 then was doing math and statistics on a trillion row data set on a petabyte sized database. And that's really where data science started, I think, in the ad tech space where I was at the time. And really the rest is history. And so since then, there's been kind of amazing things that I've seen throughout the last 15 or so years of how data science has really grown and it's really disrupted all of these sorts of industries. And I've held various roles since, as you mentioned, being an IC all the way to being leading teams and now being a leader in the space.
Yeah, okay. So 4 points I want to highlight. So you started as a QA
I did.
engineer, which is crazy because you went from being a QA to this AI leadership roles now. And then the whole evolution of technology, what personally I have witnessed, that sure, the data was there and data is still there, but then data science came out and people at one point thought data science is the career which is going to get killed. But then I don't know what happened, and suddenly machine learning, everybody started talking about machine learning. And then the next level was generative AI. Now, oh, sorry, machine learning, then AI. Now everybody's about talking about Gen AI. So Gen AI, machine learning, data science, top to down, it's crazy evolution, how the technology is changing. And I believe the next piece will be somebody's going to talk about, so very soon people are going to start talking about quantum computing and many other things. We will not go into the quantum computing. Let's come back to this transition from QA to data science. Let's say today, if I want to start my career and I want to be a machine learning engineer or a Gen AI engineer, uh, what will be your advice? Let's say if you go back to your life like 10 years or 15 years, how would you start? I have a daughter, she's 18 years old, or now she's 19
Yeah.
years old. And very soon I will have to give advice to her. Hey, Jasmine, this is how you're going to start your career. What advice would you give to Jasmine?
First of all, I would tell Jasmine, you go, girl, you can do whatever you want. But secondly, that to start at the basics, I think there's so much hype every time there's new technology, to your point, that everyone wants to jump in on what the bleeding edge is. And at its heart, it hasn't really changed all that much, right? So the math is still the same, like understanding the basic of mathematics and statistics and data and programming. The foundations ultimately have not changed. And the skills that you need have not changed. And being a good problem solver have not changed. And you should find both those skill sets and what interests you in those things. Like if you're really interested in solving problems by tinkering around and hacking around in data and hacking around in programming and using computers to fix it, then you're in the right spot. But if what you're doing is just trying to chase something shiny or trendy, or it's just going to make you marketable for the time being, if that's really your goal, maybe it's not going to be the most useful approach for you. But if you really care deeply about what's in the guts of the field and the technology, then I think that that's the right way to go. But that's where I would start, honestly, is I would start to make sure that people have good foundations, because that will all mean that you always can grow into whatever the next thing is. If you hyper focus on the technology that's currently trending in the point, by the time the hype cycle dies and the next thing comes up, you'll have to shift again, right? And so if you already have the foundation of the stuff that's underneath it, then that's an easy transition. It's certainly the same thing, and you understand the use case, and you can say, you can make the decision, does it make sense to actually use that new technology, or are we just jumping on another hype train? Like, what is actually the best solution to the problem that's in front of you?
Very nice. Yeah. So Noel, actually, that brings to a question which, let's say I'm not a great coder, right? Let's say I'm great in maths and I can read data, but I cannot code or I don't want to code. The reason I'm asking this because, Gen Zs, they are going through this whole wave of this generative AI where they can go to Chat GPT, they can go to any of the base models, they can start asking questions, and then these Chat GPT or these prompts spit out all this code. I can literally copy paste that code and take care of the use case. Now, my question is, as you're pointing out the foundation, so your recommendation to anybody who's starting his or her career, do they need to spend a lot of time on writing code, or they can leverage AI to start taking care of the initial foundation and then start building on top
Right.
of it?
I think the answer is yes, and I think it's both. I think you can't only rely on generative AI technology. I gave a guest lecture at USC earlier this year, and I actually had one of the students, the undergraduates, ask me exactly that question. Why should I learn Python? ChatGPT is so much better than Python than I am. What's the point? And honestly, if I was an undergraduate at the time, at the time that ChatGPT was around, I don't know if I would have been convinced to learn to code either, to be totally honest. I was totally a math geek. It was like, I just want to do the math. I don't really care about MATLAB. What is that? Is this really relevant? Joke's on me. I code all day now when I can. And what I told the students at the time was, yes, it does help for a lot of things. But if you don't know how to code to start with, you won't know when it's wrong. You won't know when it's giving you garbage, right? Think of it as something that's going to help you and use it as a tool. But you always want to be able to know what you're seeing. And that's where it makes you faster. As an example, I gave them, like, there was something like I use all of those tools every day when I'm coding as well. And there was something where I had no idea what I was doing. I said, I don't even know where to get started on this problem. I'm going to see if ChatGPT can help me. And I immediately ran into bugs. And I spent an hour going back and forth trying to debug it with ChatGPT because I didn't know what I was doing. I eventually gave up and just Googled the question and got the answer immediately because I had just gone about it totally wrong. I had rabbit holed it into a place where I didn't understand what I was doing. And I realized, like, it wasn't actually helpful in that scenario. I wasn't asking the right questions. I wasn't framing it right because I had zero context and zero clue. And by the time I went back and realized that's why I was lost. Like, if I tried to code that way all the time, I would spend more time arguing with one of these tools than I would if I had just sat down, figured out what the problem was, and debugged it myself rather than relying on it. And so that's the warning that I gave them. Like, you might think it's saving you time, but it's not. You might think it's saving you for expertise, and it's not. It should take what you do and make you faster. It should be like a coach. It should make you faster, but it shouldn't replace what you should do. And so it's very tempting. It's so tempting to say that you don't need it. But I think it's our responsibility as people who've been through it before and know how best to use these tools to tell them, I know you don't like it. I know it's really painful. It's really painful to be a beginner at something. It's so painful, but it's really where we fail and we struggle that we really learn the most. And people who are at the beginning of their careers don't really realize that. I don't think they see that yet, how valuable it is to fail. We do, in hindsight. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I remember our conversation. There are two jobs I think going to stay in the market. I don't know the future, of course, but testers and nurses, I think they won't be impacted because nurses needs to be there to take care of the human being. Testers, they need to be there. What about ChatGPT or Gen AI spitting out, as you said, garbage? The garbage needs to be tested by somebody so that when you put into production, you're not just putting a random garbage into production. So my speculation is that testers are going to be in high in demand. What do you think about it?
100% agree. We absolutely need humans in the loop of everything. Like who's going to
Yeah,
tell us that the AI is wrong? Who's going to keep track
yeah,
of what the algorithm is telling to the people? Like if the end user is a person, especially in cases like medicine, you can imagine you'd want to always have that, right? Like monitoring is so important when it comes to any sort of innovation. I think when you think about the cycle of build, measure, and learning, right, you have to do the measuring and the learning. It's part of it, and having humans touch it is a key part of it. I think it's where subject matter expertise is so hard to replace as well, right? Like some people, like I think a lot
yeah,
of the promise of AI, people think like, oh, you can just add AI to something and it can make it better. But when you look at models that are built from people who have zero context of the subject matter versus the people who have a ton of subject matter expertise, that's always going to win. It should, because like they're the ones, like when it
yeah.
comes to things like feature generation, for instance, like understanding the problem. Like someone with cool technology with zero understanding of the problem and zero understanding of the data is not going to do as well, I think, eventually, as somebody who really has the subject matter expertise. And then once they learn how to do the technology, it's going to win every time.
Yeah, so basically, it goes back to what you just said. You have to figure out the way technology is moving. You have to figure out to build the right foundation so that in future you don't fall back 100% on the AI
Yeah.
itself. You should be able to understand what's exactly happening behind the scene. So no, actually, that brings it to the next segment of the episode, which personally I'm very, very excited because I did not know that you started as a QA engineer. So you went from QA engineer to the badass data scientist and badass AI expert. So, what exactly happened? Let's say, how did you get into the AI role? How did you get into the AI leadership role? And what would be your advice to future leaders in the same
Right.
space?
So my stint in engineering was very short-lived, I should say. It was when I was in grad school as an intern, and as I said, that one meeting with the leader changed my life. And it was before data science became a thing. It
Mm,
was someone who identified in me, you have a talent for math. That's something that's really needed in this industry. We're at the forefront of looking at all of this data and analytics. Do you even know what analytics is? And so for me, it was this really as a lucky shot that I was at the right place at the right time. Right. And so I was just trying to figure out when I was in grad school, what can I do with this math degree? I I was told I could either go to do more grad school and get my PhD, or I could be an actuary, which sounded terribly, terribly boring at the time. And so it was this really lucky that somebody said, there's a thing where you could actually use the skills that you have in math, and there's this new world. Do you want to try this? Is this thing you want to do? Like there's data here, and there's all these new things. And so for me, that transition, as I said, was a lucky chance, but also to me was probably my first taste in networking. Like it's the people who know you, or the people who can introduce you to somebody else who can open those doors for you if you don't know that that's what you want to do. And so, as I said, I got really lucky in that space. It was before data science was really a thing. And I was in a group called Research Analytics, and I was working alongside groups who were doing machine learning on big Hadoop clusters. Again, back 2008 when Hadoop was really a big thing, and we were building, ad engine and ad targeting. And that's where the innovation was at the time. They were the places with the biggest data sets in the world at the time. I was, to this day, probably the biggest data set I ever worked on. It was a 1.5 trillion row database
wow.
or data table that I was working on, because that was all the ads in the ad network that I was working on at the time. Um, and so from there, I said I was an IC for many years, and then I was a consultant actually for many years. And it's funny, when I was thinking through like what are the big milestones in my life and my career in preparation for this, and I realized that I became a manager, like a first line manager, the same year I became a parent. It's funny how life worked out that way for me. And it had a lot of things leading up to that in work, in terms of moving from just being on like an IC on a project in like an in-house data scientist to being a consultant, right? Like, so becoming somebody that was more public facing or customer facing or doing strategic work, all of that I think was helped in preparation for me to become a people leader as well. And again, like I had a life change at the same time. I became a parent in the same year. And so there's, for me, a fundamental shift
Mm.
in understanding what it was to literally grow people, and be invested in their careers and their growth and who they are as humans, and how you take and nurture people's careers and their being, and hold space for what they need, both professionally and personally. And then it was a few years after that, um, growing those teams that I was working with on over time. Like how many how many different projects can you juggle, in terms, and what kind of strategic work was on my plate.
Yeah. I actually want to touch three key points with you on this topic, AI leadership. Emotional intelligence, empathy, and innovation. So, of course, the two very key components of the leadership is you have to have a really strong emotional intelligence. You should be able to
Yep.
understand what your direct reports are looking for without them telling you, and then handle it carefully. And otherwise, you will just lose your top players. And then empathy is another topic I want to talk to you about as part of your transition, because that's an amazing experience going from the QA to IC to data science and all those things. And then you coming in as a management role. And then I think the most difficult topic, which literally every new leader struggles with, that how can I take risks and keep the innovation going so that all the top players that I have in my team, they feel excited, they show up every day and they want to work on those things. So Noelle, from your experience, anything that you want to highlight, that'll be super awesome to learn from your experience, because you have lived that life going from literally from nothing to this amazing role as a leader. And then next segment, which I really want to focus on the AI space itself. So question for you is emotional intelligence, empathy, and innovation. How do you drive all these three different parameters?
That's a great question. For me, when I thought about becoming a manager, I thought about the best managers I had. And I've been so lucky to have so many great managers and people who I consider mentors to this day, and they were all so instrumental in my role and my growth early on, like opening doors when I said, like, I didn't come in with any connections to the tech industry. It was so brand new to me. And so, what did I want to take from those people and be able to do the same, right? And so as a woman, as a woman of color, and first gen or second gen American, one of the things I've always thought about is how do you send down the elevator that brought you back up, right? Like what are the opportunities to do? And so and lead with that kindness and that empathy and humanity of knowing, like, if someone gave me my shot, someone has always been there to support me in my journey. It is a privilege to be able to do that for somebody else. And so that's what I love about being a manager and being a mentor. And in order the first step in doing that, to your point, like is to understand who your direct reports are as humans, right? Or who those people are as in their core and what they are. They're a person first before they are your team member, right? Before anything. And so if you don't understand, for me, if you don't understand who they are as a person, or I connect to them in some sort of level to really get to establish that relationship and that trust, you're never going to build cool stuff together if you can't even talk to them as humans, if somebody's having a rough
Yeah.
time. And so really understanding who people are, and then also getting to the heart of, like, what motivates people. How do people communicate? What motivates them? How can I support them on their journey? What is it that they need at any point in time? And I think having that open communication with people, and again, having empathy for them and showing them your humanity, and being willing to be wrong at the same time. Like, I never wanted to be one of those managers or leaders that I was infallible, or that like, we're all human. I want people to know that, like, they're not going to get fired just for failing on one specific thing. Like, I don't want people to be afraid of failing, because again, like we touched upon earlier, that's where you grow the most, right? And so it's not just about how them getting the gold star 100% on everything. It's about, like, learning and growth in the journey.
Yeah.
And so that for me is what I think through when I think through becoming a manager and growing people. I said it's really exciting. I was a teacher in a previous life, and I think that's why I enjoy being a manager as well. And when you said the thing about about how do you keep your top talent, a lot of that is understanding what makes them tick, right? Like what. And again, it's been a privilege to watch some of the people that I saw hired at the very beginning of their careers and see how they grow, like what motivates you, right? Like what are the opportunities, or where can
Yeah.
I uplift you to what you find interesting, or what do you see as your next role, but what can I see you doing in your next role? Like if you can't see it for yourself, can I see that for you? Can I help you dream a little bit bigger? And where can I open those doors for you? And that may or may not be at your current role, right? Like it may or may not be in what I can offer you. And if it's not, where do I bridge that gap for you? Is that another team? Is that new technology? Is that a training I can send you to? Or is that just another job? Is that another job that I can write you a
Nice.
recommendation for or connect you with in my network? Because at the end of the day, people, it's human, right? Like even if it's not in the best interest of a specific project or a company or whatever, like all of that comes back to you eventually, right? And so if you help somebody grow in their careers, right, careers are long, man. So time is short, but careers are long, or whatever the phrase is. And so like if you
Yeah.
help someone grow and ultimately like they're in your network later, you may hire them again in the future. You never know. And so it's funny because like, so
It-
for me, that's exactly what happened in my most recent role. It was the person, I haven't worked with this person for 15 years, but he gave me my first job in the industry. And it's kind of come full circle for me to say like, hey, there's another opportunity now in my network that like to somebody who knew me from way, way, way back when said like, this is a door I still want to open for you.
yeah, it's a small world, right? You don't burn the bridge.
Yeah. Yeah. And you
That's
don't want
true.
to keep
Yeah.
people
And
down either, right? If somebody is outgrowing their current
yeah,
role and you don't have anything to offer them, you're doing them a disservice if you say like, well, what you can do is this, without and not saying like taking a wider view and be like, you know what? You've outgrown and or I can't offer you anything here, but what is best for you here may not be best for you in general.
yeah. I really like what you just said. Of course, I really like whatever all the things that you said, but one thing which really stands out personally to me is taking that initiative and reaching out to people who are reporting to you and having that open and transparent conversation that if you, based on your emotional intelligence, that's again, you're reading the room, that if somebody and you feel that somebody's not happy in the team, proactively talking to them in advance that, hey, I'm happy to help you, sending you training or some coaching or whatever you need to stay in. Because see, that's your biggest challenge, which I am noticing while speaking with my customers, that they want to bring innovation, but they want to make sure that they are not they're keeping in touch with their top players by bringing new technologies. And I think this is where I wanted to ask you that when it comes to you, as you are very technical and also you are very focused on the business side, how do you balance out bringing new tools, technologies within your team, within your groups, where everybody feels excited, and then balance out if somebody's happy, somebody's not happy. How do you handle all those innovations within your group when it comes to technologies?
So new technologies happen, as we know, all the time. There's so many things that are super disruptive.
Yeah,
And what's great about being in R&D at the moment is that if anybody wants to scratch that itch, they can. And it's one of the privileges, I think, of being in the group that we're currently in, because it's a rapid development, it's an innovation studio. So if someone says like, hey, I want to check this thing out, that they are given the free reign to do that. Where I think the balance comes in is once that has to go put in production, like, great, you played with that toy, you put in your sandbox. Okay, but there's some reality check when it comes to putting into production. Like, great, you played with it, but given where we are in our organization, given where we are and like how much it's going to cost or who's going to maintain it, and like all of these different things, is I don't want to call it quite a reality check, but a little bit, right? So it's like having an idea is great, making a plan for it and having real hard conversation, honest conversations about that in the future, or for the future of what that is where that comes in, right? Like people should be allowed more things,
yeah,
like to what you said earlier. That's how people grow. If there's something new that interests you that's coming out, a new technology, it's all the better. Go find out what that is, share it with the whole team, figure out if that's something we should be doing. Maybe we should, right? That's how we all get exposed to new things. We shouldn't be so tied to the technologies that we're already know and are bought into. But there's a line between doing that and then having like an alpha nerd mentality of like, I found this new shiny
yeah,
tool and I only want to use this from now for the foreseeable future. And I don't care that no one else understands it. There's no support from IT for it. It's very expensive. It's really brittle. It's got all of these connections and dependencies on other things. Like when you're doing that, that's being unreasonable. And I think we've lived through that as well, right? Like we've seen where that has happened in big organizations where someone has made an alpha nerd decision and has unilaterally decided that the direction of the company is going to go this way or use these stacks because they said so, right? And then I've seen organizations grapple with that decision for years later, like why are we on this thing? Why did we pick this? Like, well, and it's always
Exactly.
because of that one guy,
Yeah.
because somebody wasn't able to overrule or really justify or argue against, well, is that really the right tool for all of these things, or do you just like it? And that's hard though.
You
Go
just
ahead.
nailed it. Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to highlight because you are also on the research side. And as you're finding out new tools and technologies, I think there's that emotional intelligence comes into the picture again when you are introducing new tools to your team because you have to be careful because somebody may like it, somebody may not like it, and then you have to just balance it out. Yeah. Noel, that brings you to a final segment of our episode, which is very important: AI and ethics. I am still learning a lot when it comes to ethics, and especially in AI. And so I would like to learn from you in this episode for new leaders, for existing leaders, and somebody who's new to AI coming into the space. What is your advice? How do you see it? Ethics playing out, of course, it plays a huge role, but what is your personal opinion on this? And how would you educate or coach somebody when it comes to building solutions and putting together new tool sets or taking care of the business use cases? Where do you see the ethics playing a role?
There's lots of places, but the place I would start first is with the
Yeah.
data. Understand there's lots of first of all, there's lots of regulations when it comes to data and that have come down with like GDPR, for instance. So just make sure that you understand what that means. Like not just what all the requirements are, but why. Like why do people want to be able to have autonomy over their data or want to know that they can have it deleted for privacy reasons? Like what does it mean to have data privacy? And then now there's a lot of places that have had there's discussions around what ethics are in data. There's a lot of different places that put out various white papers on it, and just go read a couple of them. Like what goes into thinking through what it means to be ethical, right? And so I think there's lots of different places. So there's that. Just read a few things. Like there's a lot of things that are out there that talk about it, but also I think people have to understand how much of what they do day to day has ethical implications as well. So if you are thinking about, if you're a data scientist, are the features that you're making ethical, right? Like is the model that you're building, are the results of this going to hurt somebody or potentially inadvertently? Even if it's not your intention, how could this potentially be used? And I think something that you and I've talked about before, it's not just being myopic with what you currently do, but also understanding where what you do fits into the larger picture of your business and your product. And so there's things about unintended consequences that may happen because of the data, but also unintended consequences of your product, right? And so I think especially with generative AI, and one of the things that people don't really fully grok when they first say like, oh, we should use that, is what data are they using in order to, what data is being used to feed into that? Should that be used in this situation for whatever your business or your product is? And also the data that, in order to make it useful, a lot of Gen AI, you have to insert your data in it as well. Does it make sense for your data to go into generative AI models? Does it make sense to feed it back into the larger ecosystem? Or is it, for my case in the clinical trial space, like, does it make sense to use generative AI on patient data? It's a big question, like the healthcare life sciences space, right? Like where does it make sense or not? And then what you said again before about having the human in the loop, will we have humans, right? So in the generative space, like when you have all of these model results that come out, who's looking at them? Do you trust them? Is it something that needs to go through a rigorous set of review before it gets to a person? Because again, ethically, like what happens if it goes wrong, right? It's not just a security thing, but like, is what will happen to your results or what will happen to your data. I think one of the things to think through is all of these use cases and scenarios about how people are using products and using data, and realizing that people didn't think through that. That's why all of these unintended consequences have happened, and it's disastrous for some companies when it goes sideways and they don't think about it.
Yeah, I was speaking with one of the AI experts, and she mentioned the same thing. Data quality is number one, and then data privacy, data security, the compliance piece as part of building solutions and taking care of the use case is also very important, because you mentioned something very important. If there is a wrong data that we're using, at the end of the day, it's just a machine, right? We're teaching machine how to do stuff, hallucination, bias opinion, and all that. As a human, when we put that information on top of the base model, we have to make sure that we are providing the full context and taking care of those limitations of AI ethically.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, so on the same ethics side, are you part of any groups? Do you suggest any groups that people can join, like nonprofit groups? People can just participate and learn more about it.
There are a few things that I could probably send you that we can put in the notes
Okay.
later.
Yeah.
That are resources, like especially, so there's a couple things, like there are, if you're interested in a job that is in like the data for good space, there are a ton of nonprofit organizations, or a ton of organizations that have opportunities, not just in data roles, but like tech roles in general, that I had like have job postings, for instance, for that. And then obviously there is, I think there's some like ethical AI is also, it's like an organization as well. There's a few out there that like, and if anybody wants to like transform their organization, I believe that there are organizations out there as well that do consulting to take a good look at your organization and be like, are you being ethical or not? So if that's like an ethical review of what your org is doing, I think that's available too.
I wonder if somebody has built ethical or ethics calculator, or ethics analyst sheet. Somebody can put a URL and see if, drag all the data and then see if how the data is being used. That would be really cool to see some kind of ethics calculator someday.
Yeah, someday. There'll probably need to be a lot of humans in that, though.
Actually, you know what? That may be a cool. Let me bounce that idea with a couple of people. So, Noel, actually, that brings to the ending of this episode. Any advice for audience? Anything that you want to share from your side?
I would only want to tell folks not to be so caught up in the hype of AI, right? To like, that I know that there's a lot of shiny things out there when it comes to generative AI in particular, but really my advice is to be what we talked about at the beginning, like stick to the basics, but also be really grounded in what you're trying to solve, and what you're trying to solve, what the problems are, who your end users are, what's really realistic with what you have. And if you want to get into it, not to be intimidated by it either. There are so many resources out there that are available. Generative AI is so new, right? And I worry that it's going to create a discrepancy for folks, that they, like some folks who are scared of it, like, oh, it's so fancy and it's a thing that it's so magical, I can't do it. And it is so brand new. We are all starting at the same playing field pretty much. It's so new that you shouldn't be afraid to just get your hands dirty, go download some tutorials, go try it out, talk to people in your network who are doing some cool things, start a project on the side. You too can be up to speed with it, right? So rather than being afraid of learning about it and saying like, oh, it's too technical for me, it's too hard, it's too magical, anyone can do it, right? And if you are afraid of it, you might you don't want to be left behind, right, with it as well. But but it's not hard to get on board.
Yeah, I love it. This is great, Noel. Thank you so much for making time. Next time, I know last time when we hung out, we started partying around 7 p.m. Next time when you're in town, please do visit early so we can start drinking early and start partying early, and can continue for a long time.
Yeah, of course. It was so great to see you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes. See you.